I'm Teresa Langford, 68 years old, retired. I used to be a senior accountant, the kind of woman who paid every bill early, brought homemade cookies to the office, and stayed late when no one else did. I raised my son alone after my sister disappeared. Ethan was only a baby when I took him in. He was never mine by blood, but he was mine in every way that mattered. I gave him my last name, my roof, my time, and in the end, he gave me silence, rain, and 40 miles of road to walk. The storm started before he even spoke. We were on a 2-lane mountain road, the kind that cuts through the pines, no guardrails, just fog and shadows. Ethan pulled over like he'd spotted something on the shoulder. I didn't ask. He didn't explain. The windshield wipers scraped back and forth, a sound that used to lull me to sleep on long drives. This time, it just made the silence louder. "You need to learn your place," he said, eyes straight ahead. I turned to him slowly. He wouldn't look at me. Look. He didn't even unlock the passenger door. I had to reach across and let myself out. I stood in the pouring rain, one hand on the doorframe. My voice didn't come, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I already had, for years. Quiet words in kitchens, hesitant questions about bank accounts, whispers about feeling invisible in my own home. None of it had mattered. So this time, I said nothing. He slammed the car into gear and drove off without glancing in the mirror. 40 miles. That's how far we were from the house. Not a gas station in sight, no cell service, just trees and rain and gravel under my shoes. I watched the red of his taillights dissolve into the mist and wondered if he felt triumphant, if he thought he'd silenced me for good, if he believed leaving your mother in the cold somehow made you a man. He didn't know about the documents I'd signed that morning. He didn't know about the envelope already en route. He didn't know who I'd become after a year of quietly watching him build a life on the bones of my trust. He thought this was the final move. He didn't know I'd already made mine. 3 hours later, the rain had settled into a cold mist. My cardigan was soaked through, my palms wrinkled like I'd spent hours in bathwater. The gravel was embedded in the soles of my shoes. I was back on foot, no longer the woman being driven, but the woman walking toward something that was mine. The street was quiet when Marina pulled up in her black Volvo. She stepped out with her usual precision. High heels, umbrella in one hand, leather portfolio in the other. She didn't rush. Marina never rushed. "Everything's been filed," she said softly. Ethan was standing on the front porch. He hadn't expected to see her, certainly not stepping out of a car in his driveway with authority written across her entire posture. "I'm sorry to intrude," Marina said, her voice formal but cordial, "but I have documents for you." Ethan frowned. "What is this?" "Just some housekeeping," she said, offering the thick envelope. "The deed, the court order, and the $70 million trust." He took it like it might bite him. Then he read. His hands twitched, his mouth moved, but no sound came out. His skin, once ruddy with smugness, drained into a kind of gray I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. He looked like a boy again, a boy holding a piece of paper that undid everything he thought he controlled. He looked up, and there I was, just behind the car, my hair matted to my face, rainwater still clinging to the collar of my shirt. I didn't step forward, I didn't wave, I didn't ask for anything. He opened his mouth like he might yell, might demand, might lie his way out of it. I raised my hand, not in warning, not in anger, just a small, simple gesture, as if to say, "Don't." Then I turned and walked away. If you've ever stood in the rain and felt smaller than the puddles around your feet, if you've ever been told to know your place by someone you gave everything to, then I hope you stay with me for a while. This story isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who you were before the silence, and what happens when silence starts speaking on its own. They called it the Langford Estate, but you wouldn't have known it by how I lived in it. Technically, I lived behind it, not in the guest house. That had been converted into a yoga studio with skylights and imported bamboo floors. Not in the pool house. That was for Claire's wellness retreats. I lived in the old storage unit, the gardener's quarters, decades ago. A concrete shell with a cot, a chipped sink, and a hot plate that sparked when I plugged it in. I used to keep Ethan's baby shoes in that room. Now I kept my sweaters in Tupperware to protect them from the mildew. No one told me to live there, not out loud. They just made it uncomfortable to live anywhere else. Claire liked things pristine. She said my presence in the main house made guests confused, so I stopped going in unless I was cleaning. Even then, I knocked. I cleaned their granite counters, organized their organic spices, and folded Egyptian cotton towels without a wrinkle. I polished the wine glasses that I was never invited to drink from and wiped down the chairs I was never asked to sit in. Sometimes I caught Ethan watching me, not with affection, not even with annoyance, just a blankness, like I'd become part of the wallpaper, familiar but unnecessary. "Did you dust the chandelier, Teresa?" Claire would ask, tossing her blonde hair like a shampoo commercial. "Yes," I'd reply, "every morning." She'd run a finger along a shelf anyway. "You missed a spot." She always found a spot. One evening, as I was wiping down the floor tiles near the front entrance, tiles I'd chosen 30 years ago, back when Ethan still called me Mama T, Claire stepped over me without looking down. "Could you do something about the smell in the laundry room?" she said. "It's like old sweaters and—" She paused, glancing at me. "Regret." She laughed at her own joke. Ethan was nearby. He said nothing. That's what hurt the most. I could take Claire's cruelty. She was brittle, desperate to appear polished, terrified someone might see her cracks. I understood women like her. But Ethan's silence was a deeper betrayal. The boy who once cried into my shoulder after his first heartbreak now pretended I didn't exist. It wasn't hatred. It was erasure. He'd forgotten who kept the lights on when his birth parents vanished, who read him every page of Charlotte's Web under a flashlight during storms, who pawned her wedding ring to keep him in college. Now he called me Teresa in front of guests, like I was the housekeeper, like I was someone they'd inherited in escrow. Sometimes I stared at my hands while washing the dishes and wondered how they became so invisible, wrinkled, veined, still strong, but unseen. I'd raised a man with these hands, buried my sister with them, signed trust papers with them, and yet they couldn't hold even a sliver of respect anymore. Once, I made the mistake of leaving my mug on the marble island after breakfast. Just tea, no stain, but Claire found it. She held it up like it was toxic. "This isn't a college dorm," she said. "If you want to live here, follow the rules." Ethan stood behind her, typing on his phone. "Sorry," I said quietly. I took the mug and returned to my corner of the world. That night, I sat on the edge of my cot and listened to the laughter drifting from the patio. They were throwing a dinner party for Ethan's promotion. I wasn't invited. I'd ironed his shirt, placed the cufflinks on his dresser, and trimmed the rose bushes so the backyard would look perfect. But no one asked me to stay. The air smelled like rosemary and grilled lamb. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I opened a can of soup and heated it on the hot plate, careful not to trigger the fuse again. While it warmed, I stared at the framed photo beside my cot. Ethan at age 6, missing front teeth, arms wrapped around my neck. "Always my mama," the inscription said. Claire must have found it once. I saw it turned face down a few days later. I never brought it back into the main house again. Later, I crept up to the kitchen after the guests had gone. I knew the wine would be half drunk, the plates piled high. I cleaned quietly. It was easier that way. On the granite countertop was a guest list, typed, color-coded. My name wasn't on it, but the caterer's was. That night, I lay awake listening to the rain tap against the corrugated roof above my bed. My bones ached from the cold, but I didn't move. My body had grown too used to stillness. My heart had not. Somewhere between the wine glasses and the rain, I made a decision. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I wouldn't be wallpaper anymore. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and unremarkable. Claire had left to meet a friend for brunch, and Ethan was on a conference call in his office. Doors closed, always closed. I took the opportunity to step into the laundry room. Not to do laundry, but to open the back cabinet behind the detergent bottles. There, inside a worn tin once used for cookies, was the tiny black device that Will had taught me to use. I pressed the button. Red light. Recording. "Start with what happened this morning," I whispered. "Just talk like you're writing a letter." So I did. I recounted how Claire had accused me of shrinking her cashmere sweater, though I hadn't touched the dryer in weeks. How she called me a burden in beige under her breath, not knowing I could hear her through the vents. How Ethan, reading his emails, simply said, "Mom, don't start." It wasn't new. None of it was. But I had learned, thanks to Will, that documentation mattered. Not for revenge, for protection. Will had come into my life 2 years ago, just after my sister's estate was settled. He'd been her estate attorney's investigator. Quiet, observant, kind, in the way some men are only when no one's watching. I hadn't trusted anyone in a long time, but Will had a softness around my silence that made me feel safe. He noticed the bruises on my spirit before I did. "You're not crazy," he said, sipping tea in the park where we met once a week. "You're being erased in real time." I'd laughed, bitter. "It's not like they hit me." "They don't have to," he said. "Financial abuse, psychological control, isolation, all of it counts." That was the beginning. Over the next year, Will helped me install small devices, motion-triggered audio recorders tucked into vents, cameras no bigger than a button hidden behind bookshelves or flower pots. I had to be careful. Claire cleaned obsessively. Ethan never noticed details, but Claire did. So I kept backups in a locked box beneath the floorboards of the shed. It used to store old garden tools. Now it stored something far sharper: truth. I learned to speak my thoughts out loud when I was alone, in the laundry room, in the garden, while cleaning the guest bathroom. "This is Teresa Langford. It's March 17th. Claire told me to stop leaving fingerprints on the light switches." I hadn't touched the switches. Or, "Ethan denied receiving the bank statement, but I found the envelope open in his drawer." Each entry was dated and stored. Will helped me organize it all. Once a month, we met at the library, pretending to read the newspaper side by side. I'd slip him a USB drive. He'd give me a copy of Sunset magazine. Inside it, a printout. Time-stamped transcripts, summaries, even screenshots of text messages I had photographed when Claire left her phone unlocked. "You're building a case," he said gently. "And more importantly, a map for yourself. To remember you're not losing your mind." That day in the laundry room, after I finished recording, I tucked the device back into the tin and went outside to breathe. The air smelled of wet mulch and lavender from the garden I had planted before Claire redesigned it. I sat on the stone bench and remembered when Ethan was 8. He'd fall asleep on my lap here, after long days of reading or biking. Back then, he asked me questions like, "Why do stars follow us when we drive?" Now, he barely looked me in the eye. One evening, not long ago, I overheard Claire on the phone. "She still thinks this is her house," she said, laughing. "Can you believe she kept the deed in her name until last year? What a joke." Then silence. "I know, but Ethan's working on getting full control. It's a process. These old women are so sentimental. She won't even know it's happening until it's done." My hands had trembled as I turned on the recording app. That audio would become file number 87 in what Will called our archive. It wasn't just words, there were patterns. Ethan shifting money out of the joint account I shared with my late husband, Claire intercepting mail addressed to me, the forgotten medical appointments, the long list of minor humiliations that stacked like bricks until the air inside me was gone. What stunned me most was how normal it had all begun. A slow drift from inclusion to exclusion, from "we're so lucky to have you" to "you should be grateful we let you stay." Gratitude. That was the new currency. I was supposed to be grateful for a roof over my head, even if it leaked. Grateful for food, even if it was leftovers on a chipped plate. Grateful for family, even if they treated me like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Will never told me to fight back. He never said, "burn it down." He said, "document, protect yourself, prepare. You still have more power than they know." And I believed him. Because each time I pressed record, I felt a little more real. Each entry reminded me I wasn't imagining things, that I had worth, that someone would believe me when I was ready to speak. But I didn't just want to be believed. I wanted to be seen. That night, I opened the storage box beneath my cot. Inside were printouts, USB drives, copies of the original trust, and legal correspondence that Claire had said was nothing important. She shouldn't have left it in the recycling bin. I'd read every page. I knew what I'd signed and what I hadn't. I knew what was mine. And I knew with absolute clarity that no one, not even a son, had the right to steal that from me. My name was still on the deed, but not for long if they had their way. So I closed the box and whispered into the darkness. "Not yet," I said, "but soon." My birthday came and went like a sigh no one noticed. Claire was the one who remembered, at least on the surface. She walked into the kitchen that morning in her silk robe, her hair still damp from a shower that smelled like rose oil and peppermint. I was already cleaning out the fridge, scraping expired yogurt into the compost bin. "Oh," she said, as if she'd just remembered. "Happy birthday, Teresa." I turned, surprised. "Thank you." She placed a small box on the counter. Something little, just a token. The wrapping was beautiful, crisp folds, ivory paper, a delicate green ribbon. I untied it slowly, careful not to tear the corners. Inside was a set of tea towels with little lavender sprigs stitched along the hem. "They're lovely," I said genuinely. Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I figured they'd suit you." I remember wondering what that meant. Suit me. As if I were a shade on the paint chart. Beige, probably. Forgettable. Acceptable, if nothing else was available. That evening, after dinner, Ethan and Claire went out. "A fundraiser," Ethan mumbled, straightening his collar. "Shouldn't be too late." They didn't ask if I needed anything. They didn't ask if I wanted cake. They just left. I stayed up to fold laundry. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the dryer and the occasional creak of the old floorboards, like the house itself was trying to remember something. It was near midnight when they returned. I watched from the hallway as Claire laughed, her heels clicking across the tiles. Ethan was holding her coat, and she, her phone, snapping selfies in the hallway mirror. She lifted her hand to admire something, a ring. I stepped back, unseen, into the shadows. The next morning, while vacuuming the living room, I spotted the shopping bag peeking out from under the bench near the door. A luxury store, one Claire favored for big occasions. Curiosity isn't something I allow myself often, but something tugged at me, a kind of ache, soft and persistent. I reached in and pulled out the receipt. 1 diamond ring, 4 figures. The total more than I'd spent on myself in 10 years. And the payment method? My card. The same card I used to buy groceries. The same one Claire once said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll manage it from now on. Less confusing for you." I sat down, hard. The vacuum was still running, but all I could hear was the dull pulse behind my ears. She had used my account to buy herself a diamond ring on my birthday. Later that week, Will and I met at the library. I showed him the photo I had taken of the receipt and whispered the details. He nodded slowly. "That's financial fraud, Teresa. Theft." I flinched at the word. "She'll say it was an accident." He looked at me gently. "Would you?" I shook my head. We added it to the file. But it wasn't the money that haunted me. It was the way she smiled when I opened those tea towels. That knowing smile. The kind you give someone you don't respect but must tolerate. The gift wasn't the towels. The gift was the illusion that she remembered me, thought of me, cared, and even that was false. That evening I made tea with those towels nearby. I stared at their tiny stitches, wondering how long they had taken to make. Not by Claire, of course, by someone else, somewhere far away, paid by the piece, like me in a way, paid in leftovers and silence. Later, as I cleared their dinner plates, I overheard Ethan say, "Looks great on you?" Claire giggled. "Your mom probably thinks I stole it." And Ethan, ever the diplomat, said nothing. He just turned up the volume on the TV. It wasn't about the ring, not really. It was about the erosion of meaning, how birthdays used to be homemade cake and hand-drawn cards from a boy with skinned knees, how laughter once lived in this house like a permanent guest, how now a birthday was a chore to acknowledge and a chance to mock in private. I thought of that diamond ring as a symbol, not of their wealth, but of my invisibility. So I made a new entry in the archive. Teresa Langford, April 14th. Claire used my card to buy herself a diamond ring, told me the tea towels were a gift. Ethan said nothing. I saved the file and backed it up. Then I folded the towels carefully, tucked them into a drawer, and closed it. I wouldn't use them. They weren't really mine. It started with a letter I never received. I only found out by accident, on a Wednesday morning in May, while trying to transfer a small amount to pay for a dental appointment. I had logged into my online banking, just as I always did. My notebook of passwords open beside me, reading glasses perched low on my nose, but the screen didn't show my name. Instead of Teresa M. Langford, the name listed on the savings account was now E.L. Holdings. I blinked, then refreshed the page. Nothing changed. My name was gone. So was the balance. I called the bank. After 10 minutes of hold music and 2 transfers, a young man named Alex finally explained, "Ma'am, this account has been moved under a business entity. I'm afraid we can't disclose further information unless you're listed as an authorized party." "I opened that account 28 years ago," I said, trying to stay calm. "My social security number is tied to it." He apologized again and recommended I speak with the person listed as the primary holder. When I asked who that was, he hesitated. "It's an Ethan Langford." I hung up and stared at the screen. The account had been ours, originally meant for long-term savings. I had put away small amounts every month since Ethan started college. Not much, but steady. I told myself it would be for emergencies, or maybe one day, a trip I never got to take. Now it wasn't mine anymore. That evening, I found Ethan in the sunroom, scrolling through his tablet with a glass of wine beside him. Claire was out for yoga. "I need to ask you something," I said. He looked up, mildly annoyed. "What's going on?" "My name's been removed from the savings account. It's under some business entity now." "Did you do that?" He sat up straighter. "Oh, that. Yeah, I moved some things around, just restructuring." "You didn't think I should know?" He sighed. "Mom, I'm consolidating. It's safer to centralize under the family trust. Less tax exposure. It's still your money, technically. But I can't access it." "You don't need to. Everything's being handled. This is just a temporary step." I searched his face for signs of guilt, some flicker of discomfort. There was none. "I wasn't informed," I said. "You don't need the stress. Let me take care of it." Then he turned back to his tablet, and the conversation was over. Later that night, I called Will. "Can you look into something for me?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Of course." I gave him the name of the business entity, E.L. Holdings, and what little I knew. 2 days later, he came over for tea and handed me a printout. "He's been transferring money," Will said softly, "from the savings account into an offshore trust in the Caymans." My hand trembled as I took the paper. "How much?" "Not sure yet, but it's not nothing." I set the paper down on the table, beside the chipped ceramic cup I used every morning. "This isn't just about the money," I said. "It's the fact that he thought I wouldn't notice." Will nodded. "Or that you wouldn't fight." We added another folder to the archive, labeled and dated. But that night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about the Christmas when Ethan was 10, and I gave him his first savings book. He was so proud. He showed it to every relative who visited. I told him, saving gives you power, not just for emergencies, but for choices. Now he had taken mine, and told me it was for my own good. In the morning, Claire waved a brunch invitation under my nose. "Don't wait up. We're meeting with some investment friends." I nodded, then went into the laundry room where the files were hidden behind the cleaning supplies. I wrote in my logbook, "May 14th, savings account transferred to E.L. Holdings without my consent. Bank confirms I no longer have access. Ethan claims it's temporary restructuring. Will's investigation shows funds moved offshore." I closed the log and held it for a moment in my hands. I wasn't angry, not yet, but something colder had begun to settle inside me, a quiet clarity. They weren't careless, they were methodical, and I had been erased, line by line, but I was still watching, still writing, and eventually, they'd read every word. The morning they placed the documents in front of me, it smelled like citrus cleaner and wet stone. Claire had just returned from a spa weekend, glowing with that thin layer of superiority she always carried after being pampered. Ethan stood beside her, wearing the same light gray shirt he wore when he needed something signed, something he didn't want to explain. We were in the dining room, though I rarely sat there anymore. It was mostly used for their guests now. I stood at the edge of the table, watching Claire pull a thin stack of papers from a leather folder with practiced elegance. "There's something we need you to take care of," she said, her tone sugared but tight. "Just a little housekeeping." I didn't move. Ethan pulled out the chair. "Sit, Mom. It's not a big deal." I sat. I always did. Stillness, I had learned, was a weapon more powerful than protest. Claire slid the first page toward me. "It's a transfer of ownership," she said brightly, "to the family trust. Legal protection. Very common these days." I looked at the top of the document. Langford residence. Reallocation of title. Below that, legal language blurred into long paragraphs. I saw the words irrevocable, reassignment, exclusive management rights. My name was listed as the current occupant, not the owner. I met Ethan's eyes. "And what happens after I sign?" He leaned forward, hands clasped like a mediator. "You stay right here, Mom. Nothing changes. You're just moving the title into a secure trust, one we all benefit from. It'll help with taxes, estate planning. We've already talked to the accountant." "You didn't talk to me." "That's why we're here," Claire chirped in. "Full transparency." I stared at the signature line. "I'd like a few days to review this." Ethan's tone hardened. "It's time sensitive. The trust formation window closes Friday. Then it can wait a day." Claire exchanged a glance with him, her mask slipping. "We've also scheduled a tour," she added quickly, "for a new place, a private community, just in case you want more independence." "Community?" Ethan sighed. "Mom, the guest house isn't suited for long-term comfort. We thought, if you ever wanted more care, more amenities, you'd have options." "So this is about moving me out?" "No, not necessarily." I looked back down at the paper. No lawyer of mine had seen it. No conversation had prepared me for it. Yet here they were, two people I had raised and housed, asking me to sign away the roof over my head. I pushed the paper back across the table. "I won't sign anything without my legal counsel." Claire's smile vanished. "Are you saying you don't trust your own son?" "I'm saying I trust contracts less." Ethan stood up, pacing. "You're being paranoid. This is for your benefit." I looked up at him. "Then why is the mailing address on the trust set to your office? Why are there buyout clauses for displaced occupancy?" He blinked. I hadn't meant to say that, but I had read more than I realized. Claire's voice cut in, sharper now. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. We thought you'd be grateful. Most women your age don't get choices. You'd have on-site care, a library, gardening." "I have a garden here." Ethan sighed again. "Mom, don't turn this into a battle. It's a signature, on paper." "I raised you in this house," I said quietly. Silence fell. Claire crossed her arms. "Then maybe it's time you start letting go." I stood up. "I'll have my lawyer look at it." Ethan's face darkened. "If you're going to be difficult, we may need to make other arrangements." "There's an open spot at Brookside View," Claire added. "We toured it last week." I blinked. "You toured a nursing home?" "A lifestyle community," she corrected, "and they hold the room for only 72 hours. After that, we lose the deposit." "Which you paid with my account?" No one answered. I walked away from the table. In the laundry room, I sat on the edge of the washing machine, hands trembling. The pen they gave me still rested in my palm. Later that night, I found the camera Will had hidden above the pantry shelf. It had caught everything. Their faces, their tone, their words. In the morning, I logged the incident. June 3rd, presented with falsified transfer documents, pressured to sign under the guise of a family trust, refused. Claire confirms they have scouted elder care facilities without consent. Ethan grows more forceful. That evening, I moved the folder to the fireproof box beneath my bed and added one more line. I said no, for now. The post office on Laurel Street hadn't changed in decades. It still smelled of damp paper and old glue, and the same man who used to flirt with me back when I was mailing holiday cards now shuffled along behind the counter, slower but just as cheerful. I picked a time I knew it would be quiet, mid-afternoon on a Wednesday, between the retirees picking up Social Security checks and the moms with strollers. I chose the bench near the side entrance where the light filtered through a dusty window. A few minutes later, Marina stepped inside. She hadn't changed much either. Short salt and pepper hair, eyes sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses, a coat too fine for this part of town. She spotted me quickly and walked over, her steps precise. "Teresa," she said, sitting beside me without fanfare. "Marina." We hadn't spoken in over a year, but there was no awkwardness. Years ago, she'd handled my late husband's business affairs, long before Ethan started sniffing around the assets. I had never asked for special treatment. But today, I needed the truth. "You said you wouldn't email," I began. "I didn't," she replied. "I hand-delivered everything." I nodded. She pulled a thick envelope from her bag and placed it gently on my lap. "He wrote this the year before he died. He asked me to hold it in case Ethan rushed the process." I took a breath and opened the flap. Inside was the familiar seal of Robert Langford's firm. My late husband had always favored vellum paper and embossed signatures. This was no forgery. I unfolded the first page and read the header. "Private addendum to last will and testament, Robert Nathaniel Langford." "He never told me there was an addendum." "He didn't want to burden you," Marina said. "His words, not mine." I kept reading. The paragraphs blurred a bit until one stood out in bold. The $70 million trust, hereinafter referred to as the Langford Legacy Fund, shall remain under the sole stewardship of Teresa Mary Langford, until such time that Ethan Robert Langford demonstrates fiscal responsibility, emotional maturity, and a record of uncoerced service to others. Until such conditions are met, no direct disbursement shall be granted, and any attempt to assume ownership or redistribute assets prematurely shall trigger a legal reversion clause. I stared at that sentence for what felt like minutes. He gave it to me. "He trusted you," Marina said softly. I looked over at her. "Why now?" "Because your name has been removed from several key holdings in the past 90 days, she said, tapping her phone. "I did a silent sweep of property titles and bank records. Ethan's been consolidating under shell entities." I closed the file. My hands were shaking. I thought I was losing my mind. "You weren't. They're just moving faster now. They think you're soft, convenient, too polite to interfere. And I have been. Until now." A teenager with a skateboard clattered past the window. I flinched slightly. Marina didn't. I lowered my voice. "So what can I do?" She pulled out a smaller folder. "Here's the activation clause. You sign this, and I notify the trustee. The reversion triggers. Control of the fund returns to you." I hesitated. "Is it too aggressive?" "No. It's what your husband intended. To protect you. To protect Ethan. From himself." I opened the second file. It was only a few pages. The language was straightforward. The trust would no longer sit in limbo. I would hold legal authority over all disbursements, investment decisions, and veto power over any transfers. A signature, a date, a notary. That's all it took. "Is this binding?" Marina nodded. "Ironclad." I exhaled. "You're not taking his money, Teresa. You're preserving the boundaries his father set." I nodded slowly, still looking at the paper. "He's going to think I betrayed him." Marina didn't answer, because maybe I had. Maybe by staying silent all these years, I'd taught Ethan that he could make choices without consequences, that love meant indulgence, that motherhood meant surrender. But this wasn't surrender. It was stewardship. I looked up. "Where can we notarize this?" Marina reached into her coat and pulled out a small black pouch. Already done. I brought the clerk with me. She gestured to a woman by the magazine rack, pretending to browse. The woman looked up and gave a small nod. My signature felt like a whisper on the page, but it echoed like thunder inside me. When Marina took the document back, her fingers brushed mine. He may scream. He may cut you off. But he won't be able to touch that money without your say-so. And if he tries? I'll be waiting, she said. And so will the courts. We stood and walked out together. The sky was still gray, threatening rain. I didn't have an umbrella, but I didn't mind. My coat was thick enough. My steps felt steadier. Back at my little guest house, I opened the file again and reread the last paragraph. It didn't promise justice. It promised a chance to begin one. The morning after our meeting at the post office, Marina arrived at my guest house with a stack of documents in a slim leather folder. She carried it the way a surgeon might carry instruments, precise, clean, with quiet confidence. I poured us both coffee. She didn't take sugar, just a little cream, and drank it like a person used to handling long hours and hard decisions. Today, she said gently, we activate the Phoenix Clause. The phrase sounded theatrical, but Robert had always named his contracts after mythological symbols. The Phoenix Clause was his legal insurance against betrayal. If anyone attempted to coerce, manipulate, or deceive the designated steward of the trust, me, the entire estate would revert to its original guardian. It was designed to burn down corruption and let stewardship rise anew, like a phoenix from the ashes. Marina laid the first page flat on the table. This clause was buried deep in the appendix, she said. Your husband didn't want it to be easily discovered or contested. I looked at the first paragraph. The language was dense, but Marina had highlighted the key sentence. In any event of proven coercion, elder financial abuse, fraud, or unauthorized asset transfer, whether by deception, duress, or digital manipulation, the Langford Legacy Fund shall be recalled in full to the original trustee within 72 hours of activation. Proven coercion, I repeated. You already have the proof, she said calmly. The recordings, the fake contracts, the offshore activity traced through the dummy corporations. Your friend Will documented all of it. I've reviewed them. They're airtight. I took a deep breath. So what now? Now, you sign this affidavit, she said, sliding the paper forward. Then, I submit it to the independent trust administrator. He'll notify the bank, freeze any pending transfers, and shift control back to you, completely and irrevocably. My eyes hovered over the signature line. It feels strange, I said softly, taking back what I never intended to control. You didn't take anything, Teresa, Marina replied. You're restoring balance. That's what guardianship is. It's not about punishment. It's about preservation. I nodded slowly and picked up the pen. My signature was neat, but my hands trembled slightly. This wasn't just a financial shift. It was the quiet declaration of something I'd been avoiding for too long, that I had let Ethan rewrite the script of our lives, while I stood by in silence. Marina handed me the second form. This is the protective order, she said. It prevents Ethan or Claire from contesting the activation for 90 days while we prepare a legal audit. And after 90 days? Then we meet them on equal ground, she said, with facts, not fury. I signed that form too. Marina tapped her phone. The courier's outside. I'll walk this to the administrator myself. Within 3 days, the full control of the Langford Legacy Fund returns to you. She stood, adjusted her coat, then paused. Do you want me to inform them, or would you rather wait until the papers are in your hand? I looked out the window. The clouds had broken. Sunlight reached the gravel outside in faint streaks. I'll wait, I said. 3 days. Let them believe everything's still going according to plan. She nodded. Good. That gives us time to clean house, financially and emotionally. After she left, I sat alone with the empty coffee mugs. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry either. What I felt was something deeper, quieter. Relief. For so long, I had convinced myself that aging meant fading, that becoming a mother, then a widow, then a guest in my own son's house was some inevitable sequence of surrender. But that morning, I realized something simple. I was still capable of choice, still capable of reclaiming the dignity they thought I'd forgotten. The next few hours moved slowly. I folded laundry, made soup from scratch, and listened to one of the old vinyl records Robert used to play when working late. It was something by Coltrane, moody, unpredictable, with a rhythm that didn't apologize for shifting. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept the small flash drive Will had given me. Inside were months of recordings, Claire mocking me on the phone to her sister, Ethan laughing with a banker about consolidating accounts, and, perhaps most damning, a conversation between them in which they discussed selling one of the properties Robert had left me without even consulting me. "They won't notice," Claire had said. "She's too busy tending roses and boiling chicken stock." I listened without rage, just with clarity. 3 days. That was all I needed. 3 days for the clause to reset the field, 3 days before the next move. And this time, I wouldn't be playing defense. It was time to stop guarding what was mine and start protecting what it meant. After activating the Phoenix Clause, Marina guided me through the next step, establishing an independent holding structure. She called it a shielded trust, but I named it Langford Silent Holdings. The name mattered to me. It was not born from vengeance. It was born from knowing, quietly, completely, that I had earned the right to protect my own legacy. The paperwork took 2 days. I spent long hours reviewing every clause, every redirect, every contingency. Marina worked beside me without rush. Will checked in each evening, bringing meals I barely touched. I wasn't hungry for food. I was hungry for finality. Langford Silent Holdings became the new legal entity that absorbed the estate. The houses, the accounts, the residual royalties from Robert's patents, and even the vineyard he had purchased during our anniversary trip to Tuscany, everything now sat behind a wall Ethan couldn't scale. Marina didn't smile when we filed the documents. She just nodded with quiet approval. "It's done," she said. "They can't undo this without going through you and the court." The court. That was the next threshold. Marina had spent days compiling evidence. Will had given her organized logs, backed up recordings, dated notes, and the offshore transaction records. What began as a folder now sat in a full binder. Ethan's intentions laid bare in legal language. I remember sitting across from Marina as she read aloud the formal charges she was preparing. Her voice remained calm, but each word felt like a scalpel. "Count 1, she said, abandonment of a dependent elder supported by recorded witness statements and time-stamped evidence." I nodded. "Count 2, financial and psychological abuse of an elder, including fraud, coercion, and isolation." That one stung, not because it wasn't true, but because I had let it go on longer than I should have. "And count 3, Marina continued, attempted asset misappropriation through unlawful deception and breach of fiduciary trust." She paused. "That one alone could bring a criminal investigation if we push hard enough." I folded my hands in my lap. "We're not here to destroy him," I said. "Just stop him." Marina closed the binder. "That's exactly what this does. The petition is to secure you, not punish him. But if the court sees this pattern, well, they may choose to go further." The petition was submitted that Friday. We filed in family court first, citing elder protection statutes under Oregon law. Marina chose the location carefully, just outside Salem, far enough from the city Ethan had influence in. Everything was done by the book, the affidavit, the notarized statements, the full case log. I didn't sleep much that weekend. There were no threats, no storming of the gates. Ethan hadn't realized what we had done, yet. That was the power of precision. We weren't making noise. We were shifting ground beneath his feet. On Monday morning, Marina informed me that the court had accepted the case for an emergency hearing within 14 business days. In the meantime, Ethan would receive a protective notice, a formal document stating that all financial dealings involving my name, signature, or past holdings were frozen and now under court protection. When I asked who would deliver it, Marina said softly, "A process server, likely at his office. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen, the same way I used to during Robert's late nights at the lab. I wasn't praying for victory. I was honoring clarity. I walked into the backyard and stood under the Japanese maple. Its leaves had begun to turn. I thought about all the autumns I had raked them alone while Ethan ignored my calls, or Claire pretended she didn't see me. Now, the silence wasn't theirs. It was mine, and I chose it. Langford Silent Holdings wasn't just a legal entity. It was a boundary, a border between what I gave and what they tried to take. And this time it would hold. It didn't take long for Claire to strike back. 3 days after Ethan received the court's protective notice, I heard the sound of expensive heels outside my cottage. The gravel pathway, once worn thin by my own steps, now echoed her presence like a challenge. I stayed inside. I listened through the curtain, and I waited. The knock came with authority, then silence. Then a thick envelope slid under my door, its edge lined with gold trim, her signature style. No note, just legal weight in stiff cardstock. I waited until she left. Then I read. Her lawyer had filed a motion requesting psychological evaluation of me. The document stated that I was showing progressive signs of memory loss and delusional suspicion, and that I had been easily manipulated by opportunistic parties with unknown agendas. It went on to request a court-ordered medical examination to assess my fitness to manage large-scale financial responsibilities. She was calling me senile. Legally, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I simply brought the folder to Marina's office where Will was already waiting. When I handed it to them, Marina skimmed the first few pages before closing it with a sigh. "She's going for incapacity," Marina said. "Classic preemptive strike." "And predictable," Will added. "Too bad we saw it coming." I looked at him. "You have something, don't you?" Will nodded and reached into his briefcase. "Two things, actually." The first was a printed transcript, one of our many logs from the cottage security cameras. Will had compiled hundreds of hours, but this one came from 6 months ago. In it, Claire entered the storage room behind the garage, unaware that one of the recorders had been moved to face the shelves. The audio was crystal clear. She was speaking on the phone. Her voice was low but sharp, spitting frustration. "She doesn't even check her balance," Claire snapped. "She signs whatever Ethan gives her. Honestly, I could use her license and open another account and she wouldn't notice for weeks." She paused, then laughed. "No, I'm serious. I already have a card. Looks just like hers. The bank didn't even question it. Old people are invisible, especially when they're widows." She hung up shortly after. Then she rifled through the file cabinet. We couldn't see what she took, but she walked out with a red folder that never returned. Will looked at me. That alone sinks her credibility. But he wasn't done. He pulled out a flash drive and plugged it into Marina's laptop. The screen showed a paused frame, Claire in the main kitchen leaning over me as I sat at the breakfast table. My hands were still. Her finger was pointed inches from my face. Will pressed play. "You're lucky we let you stay here," Claire hissed. "You don't own this house anymore. You don't own anything. All of it is Ethan's now, and if you don't behave, we'll find somewhere else to send you. Somewhere you can stare at the walls all day." Then she leaned closer. "And don't think your little lawyer friend scares me. I know exactly how to spin this. All I need is one doctor who owes me a favor." I blinked. I didn't remember that morning as clearly as I wanted to. I had blocked it out, like so many other mornings. Marina leaned back in her chair. "If the court sees that, the motion for mental evaluation becomes laughable." But Will turned serious. "She'll still push. People like Claire don't retreat. They redirect." He was right. The next week brought a barrage of carefully planted rumors. Someone from the church group mentioned I had looked confused at Sunday brunch. Another neighbor said I'd forgotten the name of her dog, never mind that I'd never known it to begin with. Claire was painting me as a woman unraveling, so we responded, quietly and with precision. Marina drafted a countersuit that outlined the malicious intent behind Claire's motion. She included the video and transcript. She also added a notarized affidavit from my primary physician, a respected neurologist who had evaluated me just months prior and found me cognitively sound. The package was sealed, stamped, and submitted within 72 hours. Ethan didn't call. Claire did. I let it ring 5 times before picking up. "You're really doing this?" she asked, "dragging the family name through court like some tabloid widow?" "I'm defending myself," I said, "from lies." "I gave you a home," she snapped. "No," I said, "you gave me orders and a closet." She hung up. That night, I walked into the main house to retrieve my mail. Claire stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, wearing a silk robe like armor. She didn't speak. Neither did I. I didn't need to. I had already spoken where it mattered, and soon the court would listen. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in the same navy suit I wore to my husband's funeral. The fabric had softened over time, just like I had, on the outside, but the lining was still intact. So was I. Marina picked me up at 7:40 sharp. She didn't make small talk. She didn't need to. Her focus was razor sharp, her briefcase packed so precisely it felt surgical. Will sat in the back seat, tablet on his lap, going over timestamps and syncing audio logs. We arrived 15 minutes before docket. Ethan and Claire were already there, standing near the courtroom doors. Claire wore a charcoal dress far too glamorous for the occasion. Ethan looked tired, older somehow. I'd last seen him that close when he handed me that envelope in the rain. He didn't look at me now, not directly, but Claire did. She offered a smile that could cut granite. Marina touched my arm. "Let them posture. We brought truth." The courtroom itself was unassuming. Beige walls, deep wood benches, and a judge's bench that stood just high enough to remind everyone who held authority. Judge Martinez was already seated when we entered. She was known for her stern efficiency and low tolerance for performance, a good sign. We took our seats. The bailiff called the case, Langford v. Langford. Petition for emergency protective order, claim of elder abuse, financial manipulation, and coercive inheritance fraud. Ethan's attorney, a man named Joel Sherman, stood and began his opening remarks. He used words like misunderstanding, restructuring, family disagreements. He painted Ethan as a concerned son, overwhelmed by financial burdens, trying to manage an estate he hadn't been prepared for. Then he said it. "There's no evidence of malice, Your Honor. My client acted in good faith. The plaintiff's recent actions are, respectfully, emotionally charged overreactions." Marina didn't flinch. She rose slowly and walked to the center of the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace. Instead, she clicked a small remote. The courtroom monitors flickered, and then the image appeared. Rain. Headlights. A wet, winding road. And me. The timestamp was clear. The audio even clearer. "Mom, get out!" Ethan's voice echoed across the speakers. "You need to learn your place." Then came the silence, and the sound of the door slamming shut. I sat in my seat without moving, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't need to look at Ethan. I knew where he was sitting. I could feel the shift in the room, the weight of every breath sucked from the air. Marina let the clip run a few more seconds. The taillights faded. Then black. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, what you just saw is not metaphor. It is not miscommunication. It is abandonment. It is humiliation. And it is evidence." Sherman stood quickly. That moment was taken out of context. "My client was—" Judge Martinez raised one finger. "Sit." He did. Marina tapped again, this time audio only. Will had cleaned the track to remove background noise. The voice was clear. Ethan, hours before the incident, speaking to Claire inside the main house. "She needs to remember who's in charge," he said. "She's lucky we didn't sell that shack she sleeps in." Claire responded, laughing. "She won't fight back. She's too old. Besides, you said the trust is under your name now." Ethan again. "It will be, once she signs the rest." Then the clip ended. Silence. Sherman leaned forward. "Your Honor, that was a private conversation." Judge Martinez didn't blink. "So was Watergate." Claire shifted beside Ethan. Her jaw clenched. Sherman tried again. Even if those statements are authentic, they don't prove coercion. They're blunt, but not criminal. Marina turned calmly toward him. Not criminal until you add the forged signatures, the concealed offshore accounts, the misrepresented trust language. She handed the judge a thin binder. All verified, all admissible. Judge Martinez opened it. She flipped pages without haste, eyes scanning rapidly. Then she stopped. "Ms. Langford," she said without looking up, "did your son instruct you to leave the vehicle that night?" I nodded once. "Did he offer you transportation, assistance, or shelter after?" "No, Your Honor." "Did he provide any explanation?" "Not then." Marina spoke gently. "Your Honor, Mrs. Langford did not speak of this for weeks, not until medical records confirmed early hypothermia, not until a neighbor's camera confirmed the drop-off point, and not until we retrieved the audio clip that corroborated motive." Judge Martinez closed the binder. "Mr. Sherman, do you dispute the identity of the voices?" He hesitated. We reserve the right to authenticate. Do you dispute the timestamp? The chain of custody?" "No, Your Honor." "Do you have any justification for the statement, 'She needs to remember who's in charge'?" Sherman looked to Ethan. Ethan stood. It was a figure of speech. The judge stared at him. "Spoken while you were forcing your mother out of a vehicle in a storm?" He didn't answer. She turned to Marina. "I find sufficient cause to grant a protective order in favor of Teresa Langford. Ethan Langford is hereby restricted from accessing, managing, or modifying any estate assets pending full investigation. Furthermore, the court finds preliminary evidence of coercion and elder abuse. A formal hearing is scheduled 2 weeks from today." She paused. "Until then, Mrs. Langford retains full authority over the contested trust, and the court will recognize Langford Silent Holdings as a separate entity protected under provisional status." My heart didn't leap. It settled. Claire's face went red, then pale. She turned to Ethan. He avoided her eyes. The bailiff called the next case. We stood to leave. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled like coming rain. But this time, I wasn't standing alone. I had always known the truth, but I never imagined Ethan would find out this way. He stormed into the kitchen, fists clenched, cheeks flushed with something deeper than anger. I was drying a teacup, my hands calm, deliberate. He dropped a folder on the table with a force that rattled the ceramic. "Tell me this isn't real," he hissed. His voice shook. "Tell me you're not just my aunt." The word lingered like poison in the air. I didn't flinch. I simply looked up and met his eyes. "I never claimed to be anything I wasn't, Ethan," I said. "I raised you. I loved you. That doesn't change." He opened the folder. Inside was a letter, typed, yellowed slightly with age, signed by John Harwell, his biological father. The document, sealed in court years ago, had been part of John's estate, an admission of paternity, and an explicit clause naming me as the sole guardian and trustee of his $70 million fortune. It stated plainly that the funds would be held in trust under my care until Ethan demonstrated maturity, financial prudence, and respect for the legacy he would inherit. Ethan's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. "You've known all along, and you never told me." "It was your father's wish," I replied gently. "He wanted to give you a future without the burden of scandal. Your mother, she made her choices. And then she vanished. He didn't want your life to be a reaction to hers." Ethan paced the room. "So all this time, you were the gatekeeper. Not because you were my mother, but because it was a job?" I folded the dish towel. "It was never just a job. I took you in when your mother disappeared. You were 6. You had night terrors for months. You wouldn't speak to anyone but the dog. Do you remember that?" He didn't answer. I walked past him slowly and placed the towel on the counter. "I read to you every night. I went to every school conference. I stayed up late when you had fevers. When you got accepted to college, I sold my sapphire brooch to pay your first semester. That trust fund didn't kick in until you were 25. His voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew this day would come. I hoped it wouldn't. But when you started cutting me out, changing account names, forging signatures, you forced my hand." His eyes flashed. "So now what? You plan to take everything back? I'm not worthy of it?" I looked at him with sadness, not anger. "This isn't about worth. It's about choices. You were given trust, and you chose manipulation. Your father left the clause for a reason, and now the court has the rest of the evidence. You've made your case clearer than I ever could." He scoffed. "And what? You'll rewrite history? Pretend I never mattered?" I shook my head. "You'll always matter, but I won't be used." He stared at me, for the first time truly stared, and I saw what I hadn't let myself admit. He wasn't angry. He was afraid. "You can't undo blood," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "But we are more than blood. We are the people we choose to be and the family we choose to honor." He left without another word. The front door clicked shut, and in the silence that followed, I stood in the kitchen with the folder open, the truth exposed at last. The photo inside showed a much younger John Harwell holding a baby, Ethan, wrapped in a navy blanket. The man had the same eyes as Ethan. But where John's gaze held warmth, Ethan's now held calculation. I traced the edge of the photo with my fingertip. John had trusted me with the thing he couldn't give his son: a moral compass. For years I thought love would be enough. But now, the law would have to do what love could not. Marina called that afternoon. "He knows?" she asked. "Yes." "Good. Let's move forward. The court has everything it needs." I glanced out the window. The wind was picking up again. Rain clouds were gathering, and I felt in the marrow of my bones that this was not the end, but the clearing of a storm. They always think they're smarter than the system. Claire was no exception. She walked around the house like a queen, confident that no one was watching. No one who mattered, anyway. But someone was. Will had been watching, and so had the IRS. It started with a single flag transaction, $42,000 wired to an anonymous casino holding in Las Vegas. Not exactly subtle. Will traced it to a luxury suite at a well-known resort, booked under a false name, but with Claire's phone number listed in the billing records. She had been siphoning off small amounts for months, all from accounts that were originally under my name, accounts that had mysteriously vanished from my online banking access last spring. I found out about the arrest the same morning I was pruning the hydrangeas. A black sedan rolled slowly up the driveway. Two men in suits stepped out, not bothering to close the doors behind them. Claire was on the front porch, yelling into her phone about a brunch reservation. She didn't notice the agents until they were 3 steps away. "Claire Whitmore?" one of them asked. She lowered her sunglasses, annoyed. "Excuse me?" "I'm Agent Ellis with the Internal Revenue Service. This is Agent Morales. We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of tax evasion, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and unauthorized access of protected assets." She blinked, laughed. This must be a mistake. It wasn't. They showed her the papers. Will had forwarded everything: bank statements, video files, even the recording where Claire threatened to get rid of the old lady once and for all. It was enough to build a case, and Marina had ensured it landed in the right hands. Claire screamed as they led her down the front steps. "This is all her fault," she yelled, pointing at me. "She's lying. She forged everything." I didn't move. I stood in the garden, gloves on, shears in hand, and watched quietly. "She's mentally unstable," Claire shrieked. One of the agents turned to me. "Are you Teresa Langford?" I nodded. "Thank you for your cooperation. You've done the right thing." Claire's face twisted. "You think this is justice? You think anyone's going to believe a senile old woman over me?" Will stepped out from behind the carport, holding a laptop. "They don't have to believe her. They just need to see this." He opened the screen to a paused video. Claire, sitting at the kitchen island, whispering into her phone. "Once she's out of here, we drain the accounts, clean the titles, and move. She'll be dead within a year anyway." Silence. Claire froze. They put her in the car. I turned back to the hydrangeas. The blooms had survived the late frost against the odds. Funny how the most delicate things endure when the rest collapse. Later that afternoon, I made tea and sat in the sunroom, the house unusually quiet. Marina called to confirm the charges had been formally filed. There would be a hearing, a trial, as FUD, possibly restitution. But the real consequence was already done. The mask had fallen. The truth was public. And Claire Whitmore would never stand on this porch again. The house felt colder after Claire's arrest. Not because of the weather. It was late spring. But because of the silence she left behind. No more heels clicking down the hall, no more passive-aggressive reminders about doctor's appointments I never asked her to make. Just quiet. And Ethan. He didn't speak to me for 2 days. I watched him pace the hallway from the kitchen window. His movements were restless, erratic. Every time his phone rang, he snatched it up like it might save him. Then he'd lower it, slump back into the chair, and rub his temples. On the third morning, he knocked on the back door, the one that led to the small guest house where I had been living for nearly 2 years. "Can I come in?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. I stepped aside. The kettle was already on. He didn't sit, just stood by the table, shifting from foot to foot. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I didn't know Claire was doing all of that." I said nothing. He wasn't here for my forgiveness, not yet. He swallowed. "I thought we were just managing things, protecting what Dad built." I looked up. "Your father didn't build it alone." He hesitated. "I know, but I was trying to make sure nothing got taken, that it stayed in the family." I folded the dish towel over the counter. "And what do you think family means, Ethan?" He looked at me confused. I continued. "Do you think it means property? Control? Signing my name off deeds behind closed doors and locking my medications in a cupboard so Claire could decide when I was allowed to have them?" His face went pale. "I didn't know about that." "You didn't ask." The kettle whistled. I poured the water into 2 mugs but placed only one in front of him. "I just didn't want to lose everything," he said. "I was trying to protect our legacy." I finally sat down across from him. "You weren't protecting it. You were hoarding it. There's a difference." "I thought I was doing the right thing." "No," I said softly. "You thought you were doing the easy thing." He sat down, shoulders hunched like a boy caught cheating on a test. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I stirred my tea. "You let it go this far. That's the part you'll have to live with." There was a long pause. Then, more quietly than before, he asked, "So what now? Are you going to cut me off completely?" I looked at him. For a brief moment, I saw the child who used to leave crayon drawings on my pillow, who cried when his toy sailboat sank in the pond behind the house. That child had vanished somewhere along the way, replaced by a man who feared loss more than he understood love. "I'm not cutting you off," I said. "I'm giving you a chance. But not because you've asked, because I still believe you might become the man your father hoped you'd be." He blinked, surprised. "But understand this, Ethan. Money does not define you, and it certainly doesn't define me. It never did." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I just thought if I managed everything, I could—" "You wanted control," I interrupted. "You didn't know what to do with vulnerability, so you built a fence with dollar bills and locked me out." He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. I took a slow sip of tea. "You told me I needed to learn my place," I said calmly. "Now I've found it, and it's not at your feet." He lowered his head, ashamed. I stood, placed my cup in the sink, and turned to him. "This family doesn't need a ruler. It needs a heart. If you want to be part of it, you'll have to find yours again." He sat there in silence as I left the room. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally stepping into the warmth on my own terms. The courtroom held its breath. After weeks of hearings, exhibits, and silence that weighed heavier than any outburst, the day of judgment had finally come. The oak-paneled walls of the probate court felt more like a cathedral than a legal chamber. Every footstep echoed. every whispered conversation stilled when the judge entered. I sat beside Marina, calm on the outside, but my hands were folded tightly in my lap. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I was simply done. Done playing the quiet woman in the corner. Done watching people reshape my life while pretending they were doing me a favor. Ethan sat across the room. His face was tight, drawn, the color in his cheeks pale. He wasn't looking at me. Claire's seat was empty. She'd been escorted out by federal agents days before, and her name hadn't been spoken since. But her presence lingered like cheap perfume, something sticky and unwelcome. The judge, a tall woman in her early 60s, placed her glasses on the bench and folded her hands. "I have reviewed the evidence submitted," she began. Her voice was measured, clear. "This case is not merely about inheritance. It is about intent, about trust, about the obligations we carry, not just under the law, but under decency." Ethan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. She continued, "It is the court's finding that Mrs. Teresa Langford was, and remains, the sole legal trustee of the Harwell-Langford Family Trust, per the final will and codicil submitted by the deceased, Mr. John Harwell." I didn't move. I just watched Ethan lower his head slightly, his fingers tightening around the table edge. "The transfer of title signed under duress and misrepresentation is hereby nullified," she said. "Full control of the trust, assets, income streams, properties, returns to Mrs. Langford." Marina let out a breath I didn't realize she'd been holding. The judge went on, her voice even. "Mr. Ethan Harwell shall retain access to trust distributions solely as a beneficiary per schedule and discretion outlined in the trust's original framework. He is not entitled to restructure, redirect, or represent the trust in any legal or financial matter unless explicitly authorized in writing by Mrs. Langford." There was a pause. Further, the court recognizes evidence of emotional coercion, financial manipulation, and sustained attempts to override the original terms of the trust through indirect control of the trustee. This constitutes abuse under state elder protection statutes. A soft murmur moved through the audience. "Mrs. Claire Harwell is hereby issued a restraining order effective immediately, forbidding her from direct or indirect contact with Mrs. Langford. Any attempt to contact, approach, or manage assets on Mrs. Langford's behalf shall be considered a criminal offense and prosecuted accordingly." My throat tightened, not from fear, from closure. The judge looked directly at me. "Mrs. Langford, you've demonstrated remarkable clarity, strength, and restraint throughout these proceedings. The law is not blind to manipulation, even when it's dressed in politeness and smiles. Let this ruling restore not only your legal standing, but your peace." I nodded, quietly. I didn't trust myself to speak. She then turned to Ethan. "Mr. Harwell, the court urges you to consider what legacy truly means. This courtroom cannot repair broken relationships, but it can draw lines where harm must end. Let this be your beginning, if you choose it." He looked at the floor. He didn't respond. The gavel fell once, sharp, final. Outside, flashes from cameras popped like fireworks. Reporters had caught wind of the inheritance dispute involving a widow, her billionaire late husband, and the younger generation who thought they could outmaneuver history. Marina shielded me as we walked down the steps, but I didn't flinch. I kept walking. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the evening sun drape the garden in gold. The roses were in bloom, the same ones I planted the year John died. Will brought tea without asking. He placed it gently beside me, then sat in the rocker across the room. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "I wasn't trying to be. That's what made it so." We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, I saw Ethan's car parked at the edge of the property. He didn't come in. He didn't call. But he sat there for nearly an hour, staring at the house he tried to own, never realizing it was never the house that held value. It was the people inside. Eventually, he drove away. Later, a letter arrived from one of John's old friends. A simple line in it made me pause. Justice is not the loudest voice in the room. It is the one that cannot be moved. That night, I slept without waking. For the first time in years, I was not afraid someone would take something from me in my sleep. For the first time, I did not rehearse lines in my head for conversations I would never have. Everything was still. And in that stillness, I began again. I hadn't returned to the red brick house in over 15 years. After John passed, I couldn't bring myself to walk through its halls. Every creak of the staircase had echoed with his absence. Every patch of worn floorboard reminded me of our years together. His laugh in the kitchen, the way he sang old jazz songs while shaving, the smell of his favorite coffee. But now, after everything that happened, something in me was ready, not just to revisit the past, but to look at it without pain. The driveway was cracked with age. Moss crept between bricks like time trying to claim what remained. I parked my car slowly and stepped out. The old wind chime above the porch still hung there, motionless at first, then stirred by a soft breeze, as if it too was waking up. The key, unbelievably, still turned. The wooden door moaned open, revealing dust and silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was a peaceful one. I stood in the doorway for a long time, breathing it in. The house smelled like forgotten sunlight and aged wood. I walked past the coat rack where John always hung his hat. It still leaned slightly to the left from the weight he used to place on it. In the living room, the fireplace sat cold, but the bricks were intact. I ran my fingers across the mantel, tracing the faint outline of where our family photos used to rest. Ethan had been 7 when we moved here. Will was 10. Back then, they shared bunk beds and a love for baseball. Ethan always wanted to sleep on the top bunk, but got scared at night and climbed down to sleep beside me and John. I smiled at the memory, even though it felt like a postcard from someone else's life. I stepped into the kitchen, and everything came rushing back. The cabinet under the sink still squeaked when I opened it. The pantry door had a dent where John had bumped it with his shoulder too many times while carrying groceries. The wallpaper had peeled slightly by the window, where steam from the kettle always rose. I could almost hear the soft rhythm of morning, the clink of a spoon, the radio playing just low enough to not wake the boys. There was a stillness here, but it didn't hurt anymore. It didn't ache. It was just still. I made tea with the old kettle, using bottled water I'd brought. I sat at the kitchen table, and the chair didn't wobble like I remembered. Maybe time had settled it, or maybe I had. As I drank, I looked out through the window to the backyard. The rosebush was still alive, barely. Its branches were wild, untrimmed, but defiant in their reach. I remembered planting it the spring after we moved in. John had teased me for choosing such a high-maintenance flower, but he'd built the trellis for it anyway. "I'll build it strong," he'd said, "so even when you're tired, it'll hold." And it had. I stood up and walked outside. The wind picked up slightly, and with it came the scent of damp earth and memory. I knelt beside the rosebush and touched the soil. It was dry, but still rich underneath. I made a mental note to return with gloves, shears, maybe even mulch. This place didn't need to be restored to what it was, but it deserved to be cared for. Inside, I climbed the stairs. My knees complained, but I moved slowly, letting each step remind me that I was still here. Still capable, still breathing. John's study door creaked when I pushed it open. The desk was covered in a film of dust, but his handwriting was still visible on the calendar pinned above it. March 2009, the last month he was alive. There, in tiny block letters, he'd written, "T, remind her to rest." That was just like him. Always worried I'd forget to care for myself. I sat in his chair and let my hand rest on the desk. "John," I whispered, "we're okay now." "I'm okay." No reply, of course. But something inside me settled. I didn't need this house to be filled again. I didn't need laughter echoing through it, or footsteps on the stairs, or music in the hallway. I needed to stand here, in the stillness, and know that love had once filled every inch of it, and that it still echoed, quietly, in the walls and floorboards. On the way out, I didn't cry. I didn't look back with longing or sadness. I locked the door, tucked the key into my pocket, and walked to the car. The sun was setting, casting the red bricks in gold. The house looked dignified, not abandoned, not broken, just still. And for the first time in a long time, so was I. The grand opening of the Langford Legacy Center happened on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of quiet drizzle that reminded me of that day on the roadside. The rain didn't stop the women from coming. Some wore old coats, some brought their children. A few arrived in silence, gripping envelopes or worn handbags. All of them carried more than belongings. They carried stories. They carried bruises you couldn't see. I knew those bruises well. I had spent months preparing the center. It had started with a simple idea, a space where women who had been manipulated, defrauded, or silenced could reclaim their names, their finances, and most of all, their dignity. Financial abuse isn't loud. It doesn't always leave scars, but it robs you, piece by piece, until you don't recognize yourself in the mirror. I had lived it. I had survived it, and I refused to stay silent about it. I named the center after two people who had shaped my entire journey: Robert Langford, my late husband, whose quiet strength built the foundation of my life, and Michael, my firstborn, who died in a motorcycle accident just weeks after graduating college. His loss had cracked something open in me, something that never fully healed. But I carried him in every decision, every late night at the drafting table, every sleepless hour reviewing nonprofit charters and zoning codes. We renovated the old courthouse on Pine Street. It was once a place of judgment, echoing with gavel strikes and closed doors. I wanted to turn it into a place of second chances, rooms with light, walls lined with resources, and offices where silence didn't mean surrender. I didn't cut a ribbon. I stood on the steps, took the microphone, and simply said, "If you're here today, it means you've already taken the bravest step. You've said, 'Enough,' and now you're not alone." Applause followed. But what struck me most were the eyes. Dozens of them. Women of all ages, backgrounds, and voices. One was barely 20. Another looked older than me, but her voice shook like a child's when she later told her story. We had legal aid volunteers, therapists, financial planners who offered free consultations. One woman brought her teenage daughter and asked if she could attend the budget workshop together. "I don't want her to grow up depending on someone who makes her feel small," she said. Inside, I kept a framed photo of Robert and Michael on my office desk. It was the only decoration I allowed myself. Everything else was for the women: safe rooms, meditation corners, a lending library, free public Wi-Fi, so no one had to log into court documents at a cafe hoping their abuser wouldn't see them. There were late nights when I'd walk the halls alone after the last meeting ended. I'd hear the quiet hum of printers, the low murmur of a volunteer talking gently to a new arrival. One evening, I saw a young mother fall asleep in our reception area, her toddler curled beside her. I left a blanket without waking her. That moment felt holy. Some asked if this center was my way of getting revenge. I always smiled politely and said, "No, it's my way of getting justice." Forward. Claire's name never came up. Ethan's neither. Not because I forbade it, but because I didn't need to. What I'd built here wasn't about them. It was about rebuilding something in myself and offering others the tools to do the same. One afternoon, I sat with a woman named Irene. She had escaped a marriage where every grocery bill, every phone call, every doctor's appointment had been tracked. Her husband never laid a hand on her, but he didn't have to. "He made me feel like a thief for needing shampoo," she said. "He made me prove I deserved food." We sat together while she opened her first independent bank account in 15 years. I watched her hands tremble as she signed the forms. "You're not asking for permission anymore," I whispered. She nodded, eyes glassy. "I'm asking for my life back." That's when I realized the center wasn't just a building. It was a heartbeat, a pulse of possibility. Reporters came occasionally. They wanted to focus on the money behind it. "Is it true you funded this through a recovered trust?" one asked. I nodded. "Yes. And every cent here is doing more good than it ever did sitting in a vault. The legacy I wanted to leave wasn't about wealth. It was about worth. Robert always said, build something that outlives you, not because of your name, but because of its impact. I think he would have been proud of this place, of me. I was no longer the woman who sat in the rain, wondering why silence was the only response I could offer. Now I chose when to speak, and I spoke for others too. Before we closed each day, we rang a small bell at the front desk. Just once, a simple tone, not a ceremony. Just a signal that one more day had passed where no one gave up. No one went unseen. I rang it the first evening myself. Then I stepped outside, breathed in the cool air, and looked at the brass plaque by the door. Langford Legacy Center, for every woman who chose herself. The wind rustled through the nearby trees. Somewhere in the distance, I heard children laughing. I closed my eyes, placed a hand over my chest, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel grief pressing there. I felt something lighter. Maybe it was peace. Maybe it was purpose. Maybe, finally, it was both. It was late afternoon when I saw his car roll slowly into the driveway. The engine idled too long before he cut it, as though he was trying to decide whether to leave before I even noticed. But I had noticed. I always did. Ethan stepped out, his shoulders hunched, his clothes wrinkled. He looked nothing like the polished man who once strutted through boardrooms and family gatherings with arrogance stitched into his smile. He stood there for a moment, glancing at the house, then at the garden where I was clipping roses. Finally, he walked toward me. "Mom," he said, his voice lower than I'd heard in years. "Can we talk?" I set the shears down carefully, brushed the dirt from my gloves, and faced him. His eyes darted everywhere but mine. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," he stammered. "For everything. For the house. For the accounts. For leaving you on the road that night. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I was protecting the family, but I see now I was just protecting myself." I let the silence stretch between us. The breeze carried the faint scent of the roses, sharp and clean. He shifted on his feet, nervous, like a boy caught doing something foolish. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he continued, "but I don't want to lose you. Not completely. You're all I have left." Finally I spoke. My voice was steady, calm. "Ethan, you taught me something I never expected to learn at this stage in life. You taught me how to live alone again." He looked startled, his brow furrowing. "When your father died, and when Michael was taken from me, I thought the emptiness would swallow me whole. Then you and Claire started pulling pieces of me away, one by one, until I thought I had nothing left. But being abandoned in the rain taught me I wasn't broken. I was still here. I found my strength in that silence." He opened his mouth to respond, but I raised a hand. "You want to protect assets, Ethan, but you forgot that assets aren't the treasure. People are. Love is. Respect is. You tried to guard money, and in doing so, you lost the one thing money can never buy, a mother's trust." Tears welled in his eyes, though he tried to blink them back. "I don't want to lose you, Mom." I stepped closer, my gaze firm. "You already did, but I'm still standing here. That means you still have a chance, if you choose to change." He nodded, silent. The weight of his mistakes seemed to bow his frame. "Thank you for teaching me how to stand on my own again," I said softly. "But I don't need you to lead me anymore. I'll walk my own path." For the first time, he looked directly into my eyes. There was no defiance, no smugness, just a raw fear I'd never seen before. He nodded once, swallowed hard, and turned back toward his car. As I watched him leave, I didn't feel anger or triumph. I felt release. The road ahead belonged to me now, and whether Ethan walked beside me was his decision alone. I had already chosen mine. Growth has a way of surprising you. I never thought the Langford Legacy Center would become more than a single building, a sanctuary tucked in the heart of our city. Yet 1 year after its opening, we were already planting roots in places I'd never imagined. And I wasn't doing it alone. Marina and Will had become the anchors I didn't know I still needed, and slowly they became my chosen family. It began with a call from a women's shelter in Wisconsin. They'd heard about our financial abuse recovery program and asked if we could bring it there. Marina, always one to chase opportunity for justice, pressed her palms flat on the table and said, "Teresa, this is bigger than one building. We can take this model anywhere women need it." Will leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, but eyes thoughtful. "She's right. We can scale this. The only question is how far you're willing to go." I thought about John, about the lessons he left behind. He had always said legacies aren't walls but seeds, seeds meant to be planted. I looked at Marina and Will, their faces lit with the kind of determination that doesn't ask for applause, only for purpose. "Then we plant them," I said, one by one. Within months, we opened our first branch in Wisconsin, not far from where my late husband's family had deep roots. The building was smaller, but the mission was the same. I traveled with Marina for the opening ceremony. She handled every detail with precision, from negotiating the lease to arranging pro bono legal services. I watched her speak to a room full of women, her voice strong but tender. "What was taken from you can be rebuilt," she said. "You are not defined by what you lost, but by what you claim now." I thought then of the day she had handed me the envelope that changed everything, and I realized she had been a light long before I knew I needed one. Will worked quietly, as he always did. He installed new security systems in every branch, taught staff how to handle digital threats, and created safe exit protocols for women in dangerous situations. He had the patience of a craftsman, every detail precise. But what struck me most was how the women trusted him. They saw his steady eyes, his quiet nod, and they knew he meant safety. I once found him in the children's corner of the Minnesota branch, crouched on the floor, helping a little boy fix a broken toy truck. "It's not just the mothers," he told me later. "The kids need to see good men too." My throat tightened at that, and I couldn't respond right away. By the second year, we expanded into Illinois. It was harder, bigger city, bigger challenges. Marina argued with zoning boards, handled skeptical donors, and still managed to prepare court filings for women who came in desperate. Will drove miles each week, sleeping in cheap motels to set up systems and keep the new branch secure. I traveled between them, carrying the story of what we had built and why it mattered. Sometimes I felt my age, the long drives and sleepless nights pulling on my body. But whenever fatigue whispered, I remembered the night I stood in the rain, and the fire inside me carried me forward. One evening, after a long day of meetings in Chicago, the three of us sat together at a diner. The neon sign outside flickered, casting pale light on our table. We were too tired to speak at first. Then Will lifted his coffee and said, "You know, I never thought I'd be part of something like this. I just wanted to help a friend. But this feels like purpose." Marina smiled faintly, stirring her tea. "Purpose is what binds us. Blood doesn't always do that. Choice does." They both looked at me then, waiting for my response. I placed my hands flat on the table and said, "Then let this be our family. Not by chance, but by choice." In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, belonging. Not the kind tied to last names or legal documents, but the kind you build when you walk through storms together and choose to stay. Marina, with her relentless fire for justice. Will, with his unwavering calm. And me, the woman who had once been left alone on the roadside, now standing with two people who would never let me walk alone again. The Langford Legacy Center wasn't just mine anymore, it was ours. And as we expanded into new states, welcoming new women, new children, new stories of survival, I knew we weren't just growing an organization. We were growing a family. Not the one I was born into, not the one I raised, but the one I chose. And in choosing, I found home again. I found the letter in a cardboard box that belonged to no one on our intake list. It appeared on the reception counter after closing. Scuffed corners, a strip of faded masking tape across the lid. Someone had written family files in thin blue ink. Will had retrieved it from a county storage lot the court was clearing. He left a note on top. "Thought you'd want these." No rush. I carried the box to my office at the Langford Legacy Center and shut the door. The building had settled into evening hush, printers asleep, hallway lights dimmed, the front bell turned upside down. Rain ticked at the windows. I lifted the lid and breathed in the dust of years. On top lay county forms, a brittle birth certificate folded through the middle, copies of immunization cards, a photograph of a girl with wind-blown hair holding a baby who would not look at the camera. At the bottom, under a cracked ledger, a manila envelope waited, addressed but never stamped. The handwriting stopped me. It was my sister's, careful and shy, like a person apologizing as she wrote. I slid the letter free. The paper trembled in my hands, thin as onion skin, edges softened by time. I began to read. Teresa, if this finds you, I'm at North River. They say I can get clean if I stay. Maybe they're right. Maybe I keep running because I don't know how to stay. I know what I did. I left him. I told myself you could do better by him than I could. I told myself a story where I come back steady and he never sees the soft places where I broke. But the truth is, I don't know if I'm coming back at all. He looks for me whenever a door opens. He looks for me in the hallway shadows. I can't carry his looking anymore. I am not fit to be his mother. Please. Even if my name fades, teach him to live kindly. Tell him people are not things to be held by fear. Tell him money is not love. Tell him I loved him. Tell him I loved you. If he asks about his father, tell him the truth when he's ready, not when you're lonely. And if you ever feel alone, take him outside and look at the sky and say, "We're still here." That's enough for hard days. I'm sorry. For all of it. For not being brave sooner. For making you carry what wasn't yours. Your sister. I set the page on my desk and pressed my palm over the signature until the paper warmed beneath it. For years I had told myself a simpler story so I could keep going. She vanished. I stepped in. The world marched forward, and Loss took a chair at the table no one questioned. This letter did not excuse cruelty. It did not rewrite abandonment. It only widened the frame to show the human ache underneath. The way shame can turn a heart into a locked room with no windows. I looked again at the photograph, the girl half turned away, trying to decide whether she deserved to be seen. I remembered the call the county made the week she disappeared, the way my body moved before my mind did, how quickly love becomes a decision when there is no time to debate. I carried the letter down the hall to the records room. The safe stood beneath a framed line that reads, "In this place, you are not a burden." I opened the heavy door and set the letter inside, between the founding documents and the photo of John and Michael in the backyard, both of them laughing at something I can no longer hear. I wasn't hiding it. I was protecting it from daylight and careless hands, granting it the dignity of a kept promise. When I closed the safe, I felt a breath leave me that I hadn't known I was holding. Forgiveness did not arrive like a rescue siren. It came like a cup of water placed quietly in my hands, small, clean, enough. I did not forgive outcomes. I forgave a girl who got lost on the way home. I took the long corridor back past the workshop rooms and the library shelves. In one room, a mother taught her daughter to balance a checkbook with a pencil and a grin. In another, a counselor translated credit reports into plain language. I thought of what my sister had asked me to teach. Kindness. I could do that. Boundaries were kindness. Truth was kindness. Starting over was kindness too. Outside, the rain had thinned to mist. I locked the glass door and traced the letters on the brass plaque with my fingertip. Langford Legacy Center. I named it for the men I loved and lost, but the work belonged to the women who walked in and chose themselves. I wished my sister could have seen them. I wished she could have seen me. Before I close this chapter, I want to speak to the person I can't see but feel on the other side of this story. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story. I turned off the lights, listened to the building breathe, and stepped into the quiet night. I looked up and said, "We're still here."